Hi, my name is Jen, and I don't like Stephen King. I don't know if you can hear that, but the second I said that, a car alarm went off in the background. It's not that I don't like Stephen King as a person. I'm sure he's a great guy. And it's not that I don't think that Stephen King has great stories. I do. I often tend to like the movie adaptations of his book. I just don't like his writing. But the problem is, right now, it's fall. It's spooky season. One of my favorite genres of movies, of video games, of everything is horror. But you ask anyone for horror book recommendations, and they immediately start telling you about Stephen King. I have tried quite a few of his books. I've tried and put down quite a few of his books. I did manage to read twice a short story collection, Full Dark, No Stars. I don't remember hating that. I actually remember finishing, is it Dr. Sleep? The sequel to The Shining. I never finished The Shining, but I managed to finish the sequel. Why I picked it up in the first place, I don't know. I don't remember hating it, but I also don't remember a single thing about it. But overall, I want to like Stephen King. Everyone seems so crazy about Stephen King. Everyone seems to love Stephen King. And I feel a little left out. So, I had an idea. This Halloween, October, fall, I'm going to try to like Stephen King. So my plan with all of this is maybe I'm just not reading the right Stephen King books. Maybe that's my problem. I've just been reading whatever one the plot seems to interest me the most, but I end up being disappointed in the execution. I'm clearly expecting something else. So I decided I'm going to grab a few different kind of ideas as far as Stephen King books go, and I'm going to give it a try. I don't know how many I'll be able to get through for this month because he writes so much. Like, not even just talking about the number of books, but like his page numbers are massive. So we'll see. But my thought is, so last night I asked on Twitter, what is everyone's favorite or favorites Stephen King books? And I compiled this list here. So this is all the books that were mentioned and the number of times that they were mentioned. The one that got mentioned the most was The Stand. Second most was The Dark Tower. So I thought I would take the fan favorite, The Stand, and try and read that one. Then I would go onto Goodreads and see what his highest rated books are, what people think that they like the most out of Stephen King, and I'll read that one. And then on the opposite end, I'll go down to his lowest rated ones and try and read that one, whatever the lowest rated Stephen King is. Ideally, that's my thought. I also own exactly one Stephen King novel, and that is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, this one right here. So I thought maybe I will give that one a try as well. Also, on the other side, one thing that was kind of interesting to me is this one right here, Eye of the Dragon. A friend of mine, Gord, had actually commented on the Twitter post I had made. I'll post his comment here. But what he said was, his original comment was, I think I'd have to say The Eye of the Dragon, since it's the only one I've finished. Someone responded, I actually really loved this book. It's so different than his normal fare. And then he replied, I'm pretty sure that's why I was able to finish it. I have trouble with most of his books. The writing just doesn't appeal. I do like his stories a lot though, and tend to enjoy the movies adapted from it, which is exactly me. So I thought maybe this one might appeal to me as well. So there's a possible 4 books I could be reading in the month. 5 if I include The Woman Who Loved Tom Gordon. A possible 5. So we'll see. Now I haven't gone on and read the synopses of any of these yet, as well as I haven't gone on and found which ones I think, or which ones are the highest and lowest rated. So I'm gonna go and do that first with you, and we'll see how it goes. So I have Goodreads up here, and we're just waiting for it to load because Goodreads is incredibly slow. So here's all of his books. So we'll click onto his distinct works. and sort by average rating, which we have. Now, I kind of anticipated this happening, a lot of ones that were rated like one single time. So we're going to scroll down to his ones that were actually kind of rated multiple times. So I did see one there. This one has, ooh, that one's a collection though. I don't really want a collection. This one has been rated 14,000 times and it's called Coffee's Hands. I have literally never heard of that one before. So we'll just open that in a new tab here. And we'll go back and make sure I didn't miss anything that wasn't like 3 books. I'm not going to read one that's high rated because it's 3 books. Ooh, here we are. The Bad Death of Edward Delacroix. So we'll open that. This one again is a collection. I don't know how I missed all these the first time. Okay, I'm just making sure that I didn't miss anything. Okay, so it doesn't look like it. The highest rated book that is not a collection seems to be The Bad Death of Edouard Delacroix, originally published in 1996, 15,000 ratings. And I've literally never heard of this book before. Also, I just realized my camera on this scene is not mirrored, so I'm sorry that it's different as I switch. But yeah, so now we'll go to the very end and try and find the lowest rated one that actually has a considerable amount of ratings. Because like these ones, they have 0 stars. They've not been rated, or that one has 1 rating. So we'll find the one that's been rated a significant number of times with the lowest possible rating. 8, 5. This might take a while. I should have worn my glasses.
2 hours later.
There has to be a better way. So I found a list here. I found a list called Worst Stephen King Books. So we will go through and find which one has the lowest rating. So far, Gerald's Game is at 3.5. Ooh, From a Buick 8. That was actually interesting because that was on my list of other ones, but that one's 3.44. Ooh, Colorado Kid. Interesting. That one has a 3.32. So on this list, Colorado Kid is the lowest. I haven't seen a lower rating, so I'm going to assume that Colorado Kid is the lowest, with this one being the highest. Oh, but this is part of the Green Mile series. Will I need to have read the others? This makes things a lot trickier. I didn't realize it was part of a series. So every high-rated book that isn't... Oh, here we are. The first one that's on its own, high-rated, The Green Mile. So it seems like the Green Mile series is very highly rated. I know that the movie of this is actually apparently incredible, but I've never watched it. So I guess for my high-rated one, we're going to say, I guess, The Green Mile. And then for my low-rated one, it's going to be Colorado Kid. So there are those two. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of just go over the synopses of the books really quickly, see if any of them jump out to me, see if any, well, I mean, they're Stephen King, so I probably wouldn't pick them up on my own, but say you hid the Stephen King name on it, would I have picked these up on my own? So we'll see. Green Mile technically, I guess, was the one. Well, I guess this one's a collection of all of them? Maybe? I don't know. Anyway, welcome to Cold Mountain Penitentiary, home to the Depression, worn men of E-Block, convicted killers all. Each awaits his turn to walk the Green Mile, keeping a date with old Sparky. Cold Mountain's death chair, prison guard Paul Edgecombe has seen his share of oddities in the years working the mile. But he's never seen anyone like John Coffey, a man with the body of a giant and the mind of a child. Condemned for a crime terrifying in its violence and shocking in its depravity. In this place of ultimate retribution, Edgecombe is about to discover the terrible, wondrous truth of Coffey. A truth that will challenge his most cherished beliefs. And yours. This is definitely not something I would have picked up on my own. It seems like not a lot of people I know have read it. Interesting. I don't like series. I generally am not a kind of person who reads series on my own. I probably would not have picked this one up, especially with it being in a penitentiary. How do you say that word? Penitentiary? Penitentiary. Penitentiary. Anyway, it sounds interesting, so I guess we'll give it a try. Now the low-rated one. I think when I actually saw this cover, not this cover, the one that's at my work, this one right here, I was actually kind of interested. This one seemed interesting. It kind of looked to me like old school, something I would have read when I was like a teen, of finding a body on a beach. I don't know, so let's see. I've never heard of that TV show. Anyway, on an island off the coast of Maine, a man is found dead. There is no identification on the body. Only the dodged work of a pair of local newspapermen and graduate students in forensics turned up any clues. And it's more than a year before the man is identified, and that's just the beginning of the mystery. Because the more they learn about the man and the baffling circumstances of his death, the less they understand. Was it an impossible crime? Or something stranger still? No one but Stephen King could tell this story about the darkness at the heart of the unknown and our compulsion to investigate the unexplained. That actually sounds interesting. I probably would have read that on my own because it sounds a lot more like a mystery, as you can maybe see over here. It sounds a lot more mystery than horror, which is so weird because I like horror. I don't know. But anyway, this one sounds interesting, so I'm excited to read that one, even though it's rated so low. So The Stand. Just from this cover, this does not at all look like something I would read. This looks like a gladiator. I don't know. This is the way the world ends. Oh god, it sounds like a dystopian. With a nanosecond of computer error, a dystopian sci-fi. In Defense Department laboratory, and a million casual contacts that form the links in the chain letter of death. And here is the bleak new world of a day after. The world stripped of its institutions and emptied of 99% of its people. A world in which a handful of panicky survivors choose sides, or are chosen. This does not at all sound like my thing. This sounds like a survival dystopian sci-fi. I would have never in a million years picked it up. But it's pretty highly rated, and this is the one that everyone on Twitter chose the most. It was close between that and Dark Tower. Sorry, I had a brain fart there, which I was really hoping Dark Tower didn't win because of the fact that it is a series, but maybe I would have liked that better. I don't know. So then the one that I actually own, which is rated pretty lowly, but yet people I know seem to talk about it pretty highly. It was voted a few times in my asking for people kind of thing. So let's see. 9-year-old Trisha McFarland strays from the path while she and her recently divorced mother and brother take a hike along the branch of the Appalachian Trail. Lost for days, wandering further and further astray, Trisha has only her portable radio for comfort. A huge fan of Tom Gordon, a Boston Red Sox relief pitcher, she listens to baseball games and fantasizes that her hero will save her. Nature isn't her only adversary, though. Something dangerous may be tracking Trisha through the dark woods. This sounds like the least enjoyable thing I've ever read. I have no desire to read this. Why do I own this book? Oh god, what am I doing to myself? Baseball, walking through nature, survival, no. And then I have the backup book, which was the, I can't remember the name of it. Eye of the Dragon. And the fact that it has dragon in the title is already kind of interesting to me, which is very hard to find. What on earth is it called? The Eyes. There's multiple. That's where it is. Rated fairly high. Only a few of my friends have rated it. Interesting. Oh, this is the French version. Les dragons sont sortis avec Français des sous-bouts. I can kind of read French. It's just not that good. Why is the synopsis in French? I don't get it, because that's the only listing. Why is the synopsis in French? What happens if I go to a different version? Oh, here we are. Once upon a time there was a terror, and dragons and princesses, evil wizards and dark dungeons, and an enchanted castle and a terrible secret. With this enthralling masterpiece of magical evil and daring adventure, Stephen King takes you in his icy grip and leads you to the most shivery, irresistible kingdom of wickedness. See, that sounds interesting, but it doesn't sound horror. This sounds very much fantasy? I guess I'll see. Anyway, I'm going to go see about acquiring some of these books, and I will check in with you all soon. Hi! So it's a little bit after I just spoke with you a minute ago, and I've kind of done some research into how to obtain all of the books. I mean, obviously I could go buy them all, but do I really want to own a bunch of Stephen King books that I might not even like? I'm trying my best to go in with like a completely open mind so that I don't like prejudge them. But I also just don't want to waste my money. So anyway, it looks like my library currently has, currently has The Green Mile on its shelves and available right now. So I think I'm going to drive over there right away and just grab that. I've got The Woman Who Loved Tom Gordon already, so we're going to give that a try. And then the library also had digital versions of The Eyes of the Dragon and The Stand. I feel like the former was available right away. The latter I would have had to put on hold, which is fine. Scribd or Scribed had both audio and digital versions of all of them except Colorado Kid. I don't know where I'm gonna get Colorado Kid. I feel like I remember seeing it was available somewhere. Now I can't remember where. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge when I get to it. For now, I think I'm just gonna try and start off with the Green Mile. It wasn't one that completely, like, sounded terribly uninteresting to me, and maybe with Colorado Kid sounding the most interesting to me, it'll be good to save it to the end, you know? So anyway, I'm gonna go get the Green Mile. If my phone can record, like, in decent enough quality, I might try and, like, maybe get some footage at the library, but I live in, like, a small townish, and they might not be too keen on me having, like, my big clinky camera filming around the library, you know? Plus, like, kids are in the library, and I don't want to film anyone, like, without consent, you know? But anyway, I will see you all soon, whether it be at the library, or if it's just, like, a check-in once I have the book. Okay, I'm not at the library yet. I just got into my car, and I feel like it's a sign. I got in, and the radio started playing immediately, and it was the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And for anyone who knows, one of the only things I dislike more than Stephen King's writing is the Red Hot Chili Peppers. What am I doing to myself? Friends, it's now evening time. I'm not sure what time it is. Where's my phone? It's now 9:15 p.m. When I was last talking to you all, it was like 5 or 6 or something. So I kind of hung out for a little bit, played a few video games when I got home from the library, and then I tidied up my bedroom a bit. I just needed it. I've been so busy lately, I haven't had the chance. But I did go to the library, and I got this here. For anyone who was watching my previous part, you were probably all just like shuddering at my lack of Stephen King knowledge, because what I didn't realize is the Green Mile is 6 parts, and it's all like small little stories, it seems, and this is a compilation of all 6. So for all the ones where I was like, oh, I don't want to read a series and reading all those parts, it's all one novel. It's one novel. So I got it, and I'm gonna read it. It's like, I wonder if it'll tell me I guess it's 451 pages? 451 this edition. So, and the font doesn't seem too big. So I thought I would light some candles in here. I've got like 3 of them. You can't see them all. There's one over there and another over there. But anyway, I thought I'd light some candles and just make it spooky in here, and maybe that'll increase my enjoyment. But when I was driving to the library, it's not a far drive, but I only had a little bit left of my audiobook. So the one I was currently listening to, it's Bunny by Mona Awad. Awad sounds right. I don't know, none of that sounds right. Anyway, I was listening to that by her, and I finished it, so I was kind of stuck with what do I read on the way home. So I remembered that Scribd, whatever it's called, it had some of the audiobooks available. So I ended up getting The Eyes of the Dragon, and apparently that one, from my further research, is not at all horror. It is completely fantasy. And from the beginning of the novel, which is interesting, Roy, what are you doing? From the beginning of the novel, what it seems like is King actually wrote the book for his daughter. So from my research, I'm finding that it's actually meant as kind of like a YA fantasy type thing that he wrote for his daughter, which is weird, because one thing that particularly stood out to me in the like short bit that I've listened to the audiobook, maybe 20 minutes total if that, was one awkward part. So for anyone who is like me and has no idea what this book is about, this is what I'm understanding it's about so far. For anyone who has read it, you're probably thinking, Jen, that's not at all what it's about. But anyway, what it seems to be about is there's this king, And he had never gotten married, never really had any heirs, because it kind of seemed like his mom would live forever when she was the queen. But she dies suddenly, chokes on a lemon slice, and so he is brought in. And then his advisor, this magician, is like, oh hey, you should get married and have some heirs. So he gives him a few and he chooses one randomly, because he's not really into women or sex, it seems. Just generally. I don't know. I don't know his whole story. But anyway, that's what it seems like so far. So then he chooses the one who happens to seem the most timid of them all. He's 50, by the way. She's 17. So she's a 17-year-old. Now, Rory, why are you licking the carpet? What are you doing? Rory, you're making my filming very difficult. But anyway, so she's a 15-year-old now married to, a 17-year-old now married to a 50-year-old man, and so it's their wedding night, and he's like about to duck out on her, but he's like, wait, she's just as timid and has no idea about sex like I do. So they get into the bedroom, and he undresses, and this isn't an exact quote. When she sees him naked for the first time, she looks at his flaccid penis, no, that was a direct quote, and says, "What's that?" Keep in mind, Stephen King wrote this for his young daughter. And then he goes on a big garbly rant about how she has no idea what she's doing, just like him, and blah blah blah. And he goes off on a tangent. He replies, "My king's iron." In which case she says, "It doesn't look like an iron." And he says, "It hasn't been forged yet." And then she says something like along the lines of like, "Then where's the forge?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll show you. You didn't know you brought it with you." King wrote this for his daughter. Anyway, I'm gonna read The Green Mile now. Hopefully there's less flaccid penises. Hi, it's only been like a couple minutes, but I already have some thoughts. First off, this book, in true Stephen King fashion, starts with 2 forewords. 2. One explaining why the novel is bound in this way, and another explaining how it came to be in the first place, all of which are way too long, and have a lot of references to Charles Dickens. But anyway, putting that aside, I finally ended up having to skip that, because I'm like, if I keep reading this, I'm never gonna get into the novel. So I start the novel, and I'm on page 1 here. Okay, so here is what it says. So there's a chair. The inmates make jokes about the chair, the way people always make jokes about things that frighten them but can't be gotten away from. They call it Old Sparky, or the Big Juicy. I'm with it so far. Okay, cool. They made cracks about the power bill, and how Warden Moore's would cook his Thanksgiving dinner that fall with his wife Melinda, too sick to cook. Period. That's it. That's the end of the sentence. What does that have to do with Thanksgiving dinner? What does that have to do with his wife, Melinda, who's too sick to cook? I don't understand. Why? What does that have to do with the chair? Why are they in the same paragraph? I don't understand. I don't get it. And this is what I feel like his whole writing is. It's a bunch of tangents that just don't tie into the plot, and I don't understand. You know, I think I'm gonna end up having to put this into 2 parts, because this entire video is gonna be me reading quotes that I just think are... But anyway, one was a woman, Beverly McCall. She was black as the ace of spades, and as beautiful as the sin you never had the nerve to commit. I'm just gonna leave that with you. Okay, first, I don't think I'm ever gonna make it through this book, because literally this entire book is going to be me talking about the quotes. Also, 2, what is Stephen King's fascination with penises? I don't get it. This line right here, just on the very next page from the previous line. The governor called the next day around 3 in the afternoon, commuting her sentence to life in the Grassy Valley Penal Facility for Women. All penal, no penis, we used to say back then. I think that we should start a Stephen King penis counter and see how many times each book mentions the word penis, and see which one wins in my rating and which one wins in the penis counter. So for each book, might be at 1. I'll have to go back to the Eye of the Dragon and confirm, because it's possible it could have been mentioned before and I just didn't notice it. And I don't know if euphemisms count, like when he talks about his king's iron. So we'll get into the logistics, but this one is at 1 so far. So a few more thoughts that I have. First off, why did no one tell me that there's a dog that dies in this book? I mean, spoiler alerts. It only happens in like the first, I'm page 30 right now. No one told me there was a dog that died. Also, I feel like this is another good example of why Stephen King's writing is difficult for me sometimes. So at the moment, they're looking for 2 girls who have gone missing, presumed dead or something, because there's a lot of blood. So there's some dogs and a search team chasing after them. So they say here, then they came out on the edge of the Trapias River, which is wide and slow at that point, running southeast through low wooded hills, where families named Cray and Robinette and Duplessis still made their own mandolins, and often spat out their own rotted teeth as they plowed deep countryside, where men were apt to handle snakes on Sunday morning and lie down in a carnal embrace with their daughters on Sunday night. I knew their families. Most of them had sent Sparky a meal from time to time. Who's Sparky? I don't know. Sparky's never been mentioned before. On the far side of the river, the members of the posse could see the June sun glinting off the steel rails of a great southern branch line. About a mile downstream to their right, a trestle crossed towards the coal fields of Western Green. Then finally, they get back to the search. Finally! Like, what was the point of that whole paragraph? How does it help the story of finding these girls? Also, this is a story in a story right now, because they're talking about the backstory about how John, is that his name? Coffey? John Coffey ended up in this prison in the first place. How is it necessary? Why do I need to know they make their own mandolins? Why do I need to know they spit out their own rotted teeth and lie with their daughters? Does this really help me understand the chase after John Coffey? I don't get it. It just doesn't feel like it pertains to the story, and instead I feel like I'm skipping over it. And so much of it because it just doesn't pertain. Okay, so my camera just fell over, sorry. People who are avid Stephen King fans and who have read The Green Mile before were probably laughing at me when I mentioned the penis counting contest. Because I should forewarn you, I've never seen the Green Mile movie. I've never read the book. I don't know anything about it. Well, apparently that's a fun little subplot that actually apparently means something later, but I don't know what. The one guy who works at the prison, who's the one telling this story, who has a UTI. So that's fun. But yeah, so there's actually a line that says, "By the way, how's that problem of yours?" He pointed delicately in the direction of my groin. So while he hasn't outright said penis, he's only said it the one time, it has been mentioned a whole heck of a lot. Hi! So I've officially finished part 1 of The Green Mile. I think it was called like The Two Dead Girls or something like that. Sorry, my camera's just not gonna stay up. So it's called The Two Dead Girls. I didn't dislike it, but I feel like nothing really happened, which is interesting because in those little like forward parts that I talked about Stephen King talking about, he was kind of worried about like having each part and wanted each one to kind of have its own conclusion. And really all that really happened in the first part was John Coffey came to the prison, a mouse showed up, and it went a little bit into John Coffey's backstory, and like that was it. And I mean, really it was only like 70 something pages of the book, which is not a lot. So I guess like it kind of makes sense that it doesn't really have its own conclusion, but the fact that he said it had its own conclusion. So I don't know. It didn't really seem to do much for me on its own. It had a lot of like pointless rambling that I felt like didn't need to be there. Like the fact that it was 70 pages and that was all that happened. You know, like there was a lot of talk of his UTI and a lot of talk of like downriver laying with your daughters kind of thing. And I felt like a lot of that wasn't needed. I also feel like some of the language is not great. I mean, I know it's supposed to be set in the 1930s, but they've already used the N-word twice and used another derogatory term for indigenous people. And I mean, I guess it's the 1930s, that language is more common there, but does it really stand up to today? I don't know. I don't know. Again, it's a person who grew up in the 1930s, and that would have been more language, like, common there. So I guess it's staying true to the time, and I suppose that is something that probably would have been done, but I mean, it isn't necessarily the main character or the narrator, whoever he is, his words. I guess he did use the term for the indigenous person, but he didn't use the N-word. He was just telling other people's words. I don't know. So that kind of like, but I don't hate it. We'll see. I'm still not very far in. I've barely scratched the surface, so we'll see. Hi friends. It is now Sunday evening. What time? Like 7? 6:30. I don't know if I actually told you in the last clip. So the last time I updated you, I think was Thursday night. I worked a whole heck of a lot this weekend. I worked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, doing like full days, and they were really early. So I didn't really get much of a chance to update you much, but I also really wasn't reading much. So I thought now I would kind of catch you up on the bit that I have read. I am now, so Green Mile is divided into, I think it's 6 different parts. It was originally released as like 6 different short stories, I guess. I just started part 3, so I'm about this far in. I'm 154 pages into a 460 page novel, so whatever that percent works out to be. Future Jen will do the math. So far the book has grown on me a bit. It's kind of really interesting because I guess, okay, I should, in order to talk about one of the books, I feel like I need to tell you about the other one. So I'm currently in the middle of 2 different Stephen King books right now. If you remember, you probably remember because it's only been minutes for you, but like for me it's been days. So I chose a few different novels and I happened to find an audiobook of Eye of the Dragon. The book is interesting because it isn't horror like Stephen King normally writes. It's actually high fantasy. And my friend who read it is actually a big fan of fantasy and sci-fi and all that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting to me reading the 2 simultaneously with this one. I guess is probably maybe horror. It's not scary, so I don't know if it's supposed to be horror. I feel like it's supposed to be, but... And it's interesting seeing where like the similarities lie in King's writing and where some of the differences are. Both of them... Okay, so far, I think I'm about 20% into the audiobook of it. And for both of the novels, I feel like if you asked me the plot of them, I still don't know if I could tell you what it is. I could tell you like what's happened, but I don't, like if you were to tell me like, Jen, summarize this book, like the plot of this book, I don't think I could. The Green Mile so far is about this man who works in a penitentiary, I forgot I couldn't say that word, penitentiary, and he works in the, what's the word? Oh my god, I'm so tired right now. I have had like no sleep. I'm so tired, so I can't think of words right now. I can't word. The death row! He works in ward E, block E, whatever it is, where the death row inmates are. They call it the Green Mile because as they walk down the floor, they usually call it the final mile or something like that. The floor is linoleum and it's green, so they call it the Green Mile. But anyway, so it's his story that the main character is telling like years later of his time working there, and this particular summer. Wait, summer? I feel like it's summer. Maybe I just imagined that. Maybe it's not at all summer. But anyway, during this time, there happened to be 3 like major inmates who were in right now. There was this Frenchman whose name I forget, Delacroix. I feel like that's not right at all right. But anyway, this French Cajun man who has a pet mouse called Mr. Jingles. There is John Coffey, who is this big man who was arrested for raping and killing 2 little girls, but he doesn't seem to like know who he is or where he is or anything. Like he knows his name, but like he doesn't seem to know what's going on around him. I don't know. I imagine maybe they're getting to it now. They keep like talking about John Coffey as if he's this big player, but honestly I think his name has probably been mentioned less times than penis has been mentioned, but we'll get to that in a second. And then there's this new man who I completely forget his name. I'm not good with names, but apparently he's 19 and doesn't give a shit. He just wants to cause havoc and murder and everything. So anyway, apparently his idol is this guy Billy the Kid. I feel like I should know who that is, but I don't. I will probably have to Google it. But anyway, what I find is really interesting is so far, 150 pages in, it's so interesting to me that Stephen King managed to write a novel about a urinary tract infection, and a horror novel at that. Because while I think that yes, urinary tract infections could be quite horrible, I've never like once had one and been like, I should write a horror novel that bases solely around this, because nothing else has happened. Literally, like every single page is the main character whining about his urinary tract infection. It's other people motioning to his groin and asking like how he's doing with his urinary tract infection. The day this Billy the Kid wannabe character comes in, there's this whole scene about how he wakes up in the morning, and this is the thing that really throws me off, and I can't seem to figure out why it is, but he seems to really like peeing outside. So anyway, so he wakes up and barely makes it to the stack of wood outside before his bladder practically bursts. Sorry, my nose is so itchy all of a sudden. His bladder practically bursts and he's doubled over in pain from this urinary tract infection. So he almost doesn't come into work, but then he has to, and then there's this whole thing. I know I heard that apparently this comes into play later, and I'm like waiting for it, but I honestly don't understand, because I just feel like this whole book, it's like if you were building a building, you need the foundation, and right now the foundation of this book appears to be a urinary tract infection. And all of the other characters and everything else that has happened there is just like the outside of the building. So when people look in, they're going to see the outside. They're going to see this plot of the novel of this guy working in death row. But the entire book revolves right now around this man's urinary tract infection. On the other hand, the eyes of the dragon. I finally know where the title comes from for that. But this one is very interesting because Stephen King doesn't normally write fantasy, and I was actually just now before I did some recording doing some research about the book and him and everything like that. And sorry, my nose is for some reason so itchy today. So he doesn't normally write fantasy, and I know it's always nice for authors to be able to step out of their comfort zone. But I feel like, no, granted, I'm not the biggest fantasy, like, buff. And I've read a bit here and there, but I feel like, to me, Stephen King, who doesn't write fantasy, was given a checklist of what a typical high fantasy novel, like a medieval high fantasy novel, contains, and just went down the checklist, and it feels very cliched in that sense. And again, nothing has happened. I'm 20% of the way into the book, and nothing has happened. All it's done is talk about this place called Delane, and how there's been many of kings, and this new king is not particularly a great king or a bad king. He just is a king. He wasn't much interested in relationships, and there was that previous aforementioned penis scene. I am happy to report, though, that there has been no further mentions of penises. So this book that he wrote for his daughter only has one penis mention so far, so. But this man eventually has 2 children. He also has this magician who is one of his aides, who's not quite who he says he is, and he's got evil intentions and all of this. And he grows to despise the first son, who's quite good and noble and kind, and instead is trying to get the second son into office. But anyway, so the evil magician Flag has a plan to put Thomas in office and manipulate him, I guess, from the sidelines, and eventually throw Delane into a giant anarchy and dissolve the entire government. And this is his long-term plan. So you know that he eventually does something that gets the older son imprisoned for life, because it's been briefly mentioned, or maybe not even for life, but like imprisoned for a heinous crime. But only just now am I getting to what the crime is, and the title of the novel is apparently Eyes of the Dragon, because there's these eyes of the dragon that he uses to watch the king in his bedroom. I don't know, is there like a dragon statue? I don't know, I cut halfway through that chapter, so I don't know what it is. But anyway, this is basically all that's happened. Like, I've told you everything that happened in 20% of a novel, and I summarized it in like 3 minutes, and I did it in a messy fashion. I probably could have streamlined my thoughts and told it better. But that's all that happened. That's it. I don't know the plot. I don't know where it's eventually going. I feel like, to me, there's events that are happening and I'm like, okay, this is nice, but like, I don't know why they're happening. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what this book is about. Like, I have no idea. And what's very interesting is because, like, I've read a little bit of King in the past, or tried to, I guess, but I don't remember anything about it. And I don't know if this was just complete happenstance or if this is a very common thing for him, but both of the novels that I'm reading right now are written, I wanted to say very weirdly, but the entire thing of this this video is King writes really weirdly and I don't like it. But what I mean by weirdly is not the writing style, but the perspective. Both of them are written in a Green Mile is first person, past tense. Eyes of the Dragon is third person, past tense, but they're both written as if there's a storyteller telling the story to you. It's not that merely these events are transpiring. They are talking to you about these events. It's almost like you're reading someone's personal diary, or, you know, you're sitting around a campfire and they're telling you the story of what happened in Delane, or that time I worked on the Green Mile. Now, we do know why in the Green Mile this is happening. It's him years later, now living in a nursing home, writing down his own story, which I feel like works for that novel. But The Eyes of the Dragon hasn't quite explained why it's like that, but it's just very interesting and it's very jarring in some senses because a lot of the author tends to leave things up to you that they have previously mentioned. They'll be like, oh yeah, Jan did this, but you don't know who Jan is. There's no Jan, but like as an example. Or you'd be like, oh, remember earlier how I talked about my urinary tract infection? Well, this is how it finally makes sense. Or sometimes I found in the Green Mile he'll repeat things. He'll like explain an event or start to, then the chapter ends, and then a scene of him at the nursing home will happen, and then he goes back and then he'll be like, okay, so remember how the guy was doing this thing and that, and then this was very repetitive in such a way. Like, I do remember, yes, it was the previous chapter. Like, the chapters are not long. It just happened in my moments 5 minutes ago. You didn't need to recount that. And it's just a very odd kind of perspective because then the author, well, the narrator throws in their own thoughts of things, which is where I find these jarring Stephen King moments. Like in the Green Mile, that one I talked about previously, about making their own mandolins and sleeping with their daughters, laying with their daughters. Like, that was the narrator remembering this moment and tying his own personal story to it, but I don't feel like it added anything to it. And like in The Eyes of the Dragon, there's one part where he goes on about how he's a historian and is studying these kinds of events, and historians feel such a way and they like to look in things this way and blah, blah, and like they're all adding their own personal touches, which is to me a very odd writing style that I don't think sits well with me. I don't know. Also, one thing that's kind of weird to me about Stephen King novels is, maybe not Stephen King novels, maybe it's just like the main character of The Green Mile, whom I don't love terribly. And I know it's written in the 1930s, and I know that things were different back then, but he's very much like I don't know how to describe it. But there's like in that scene where he's like doubled over in pain trying to pee outside by the wood. He talks about how he couldn't focus on what was going on around him when he almost fell over into his own puddle of piss because he was too distracted by the excruciating pain in an area that is mostly ignored except during an act of the greatest pleasure a man can experience. Or like when he talks about how much living in the country is great because he can pee outside and it's one of men's greatest pleasures. And it's like very things like that. Like it's always, what's pleasurable for men? Men love this. Men think that this is so pleasurable. And things like that. Or like describing some woman and it'd be like, any man have to be blind to not think that she's pretty, and things like that. Or just describing like, there was one female inmate who apparently was very pretty and talking about her watching her round bottom go down the right to the hall. And it's just like, so In King's writing style, we're going to talk about my previously mentioned penis counter that I started for these books. Again, I haven't read a ton of Stephen King books, and I don't know if this is just a weird thing with this one, but as I mentioned a little earlier, Eyes of the Dragon is still only at 1. Now, it is by far the weirdest mention of penises, especially in a novel that is young adult written for his daughter, but there's only the 1. Green Mile, on the other hand. It has been mentioned in name 3 times. 3. In 150 pages, which, okay. Testicles have been mentioned 3 times in name, and I lost count of how many times groin or euphemisms, I think pecker was used, or just people generally motioning in that area. I lost count. I know I said that like I wasn't going to buy the Stephen King books because like what if I don't even end up liking them, but I really wish that I'd almost had a copy because I would have loved to have annotated these and like just written some of these thoughts. Like instead you guys are gonna end up with like a 4-hour long video of me talking about all of these things. It's just not the same, but like imagine just in the margins having a penis counter and then handing that off to someone in the future who can also get enjoyment out of the penis counter, you know? Like, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like I should tell you, preface before I go. I would say I'm not enjoying Eyes of the Dragon right now. I'm not enjoying it. When I'm listening to it, it's not that it's unenjoyable, but it's also not enjoyable. Like, I don't feel the need to listen more. And I also don't know if that's the narrator. I find that the narrator is very dry and very blunt, and he doesn't have a ton of, I don't want to say expression in his voice because he does. He has expression. It's just, I don't know. Everything is very dry and cut and blunt. Like, when you're writing, you'll write a certain way, but you speak differently. Like, if I was going to say, you were saying, Jen, have you ever tried such and such food? I would probably say to you, no, I haven't. But if I was writing that story down, like, Jen, have you ever tried such and such food? And Jen might say, like, no, I have not. He reads like that. He's like, he has not gone to the barn yet today. But people don't really speak that way, so it kind of pulls you out of the story. It's like, oh, he hasn't gone to the barn yet today. It's jarring. So maybe I'll try like the actual physical book and see if I like that like a little bit better, but we'll see. Green Mile, as much as I am hard on the book about a urinary tract infection, again, I would say I'm enjoying it a little bit more. I'm interested enough that I do want to pick it back up. Like, I'm probably going to read it right now. I'll I'll read more, see where it goes. I'm really interested to learn more about John Coffey and the guy with the Mr. Jingles, but instead I'm just learning about a urinary tract infection, but I'm interested to see if there's more about it. And hey, at the very least, I'm getting some nice medical knowledge, I guess. Maybe. Anyway, I'll update more once I've read more. So it's kind of funny that like an hour ago I went on this giant rant about how none of these books seem to have a plot, and like I think I finally just got to the plot of this book. It also means that I've gotten to kind of a weird part where I don't know if I should talk spoilers in these videos or not. I feel like most people have read Stephen King or have read The Green Mile. I don't know if maybe what I could do is like certain spoiler discussions, I could always just put a tag like spoilers, go to this time to avoid the spoilers. So that is something that I could do going forward, but I think I'll just keep this little bit spoiler free right now, and then we'll see. But it is hard to talk about my thoughts about what just happened without spoilers. But I just gonna say, like, I can't believe that there was like the page where I'm at, it's 161. I'm like halfway into the second short story. So I cannot believe that there was 2.5 short stories and 161 pages of a build up to this. Like, that was the purpose. Literally 161 pages of this just for this. Hi, Rory. Hi. You wanna come say hi? Hi. Oh, hello. Yes, I don't want you licking my face. Well, I've been reading like the past couple of days. I haven't had my camera with me. It's been at home and I've mostly just been reading on my lunch breaks at work. So I haven't been able to share with you all the fun Stephen King quotes that make me go, oh, right, I'm reading a Stephen King book. So here's one particular paragraph. And it was funny because I thought of it for one reason, but then when I read it out loud again, I realized other reasons of why I don't like Stephen King's writing. So the first one, I guess I can't really tell you the context, but like if you've read the book, you'll know the context. But anyway, he's like, he shook his head. Right, I'm trying to complain about Stephen King here. He shook his head. And perfectly normal so far, so bear with me. He shook his head. Right, left, back to center. Oh, back to dead center, sorry. It's like, that just reminds me, recently I listened to the audiobook of Elevation, and there was an entire, like, event about how this guy's calendar, the dates, the numbers on the calendar, his digital calendar were written in black. But if there was an event, they were written in red. He went to a particular date with an event, deleted the event, and then watched as the date turned from red to black. And then he went and added an event on a different day and watched as the date turned from black to red. And this feels the same. Like, do you really need to tell me how to shake a head? Like, literally, he shook his head. Right, left, back to dead center. That didn't need to be a full sentence. He shook his head. He didn't know how he'd helped it. Like, that could have been fine. That would have been fine. You did not need to tell me how to shake a head. I'm aware. Then the very next sentence, he didn't know how he'd helped it. And then in brackets, how he'd cured it. You could have just used that in the first place. You didn't need to add both. But anyway, so then we go on forward. And his placid face suggested that he didn't give a rat's ass. Any more than I'd give a rat's ass about the mechanics of running when I was leading in the 50 yards of a 4th of July 2-miler. Like, I understand he's trying to give a reference of being like, this is something I don't care about. But like, it came out of nowhere. We weren't talking about, what on earth is a 4th of July 2-miler? Like, is this just something I don't know because I'm not American? Do people run 2-mile races on the 4th of July? Is this a tradition? And this guy is the only person who doesn't care about them. So I read a bit more. It's about 10 p.m. now. And I just finished the third part of the book. I think the third. Yeah, I'm on number 4 now. It's interesting. The ending, I have to say, is something, like the ending of that chapter, is not something that I saw coming, but I should have. Like, I expected something to happen. Especially with like how he kind of like was alluding to it. Like, he's not really building up like surprises, obviously. So I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. I didn't hate it. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, like, if I had to rate like each chapter as its own kind of thing, not chapter, but like section, what would I rate it? And while I was thinking about that, I decided to like peruse to the back of the book, as one does, because I'm definitely one of those people who reads the back of the book like midway through the book. And so I decided to read the acknowledgements, which, you know, I probably shouldn't have because there were spoilers in it, but at the same time I also went to the back of the book. But it was kind of interesting because in the acknowledgements, Stephen King actually wrote that after the first chapter had just been published, and I guess he had written all of it already. I keep saying chapter, but like there were individual segments. I can't remember his word for them. What were they? A serial novel. So the first serial had just come out. And so he wrote these. And that was when it occurred to me, like, this novel is not a novel. It's 6 serials. And one thing that he mentions in that is he mentions Charles Dickens again, because I am finding that Stephen King is very repetitive, and that's something that I've been very repetitive about in this book. Actually, in the time that since I last spoke to you all, he also taught me how to shake my head again. So that was interesting. So in absolutely perfect timing, my camera memory got full and I had to go upload it all to my computer. So now we're back, and now I need to continue on where I last left off, which was talking about Stephen King continuing on where he last left off. In the afterword, he talked about Charles Dickens and he talked about his experience writing, what were they called again? Serial novels, and his worry about trying to pick up where, like, remind people of where he left off and things. Now, I don't know how far apart they were all published from each other, but for the most part, like, I feel like often series don't do too much, like, reminding you of where they left off. Yes, definitely there are some novels that do kind of try and, sorry, my hair's just doing like everything right now. It's kind of lost, it's in that day where it's lost its curl, but it still has like a wave, and some of them try and stay curly, but most of all it just looks like a mess. But anyway, so you do get some novels that try to like refresh you of where they last left off, and definitely it can be handy if like you last read the book quite a while ago, or in this case the serial. But with it now being a bind up, and that was kind of interesting because he did talk about it now, what happens if he does publish it as one kind of bind up thing, because also keeping Charles Dickens in mind, people don't want to pay so much for such a short paperback. But as a bind up, it was like I would read this chapter, something happens, and then he goes to the nursing home, and then in the next scene he explains what just happened in the previous chapter, and he said he like worked it into the story, which like I guess he talks about like what, like literally, I don't want to say it because I'm not ready to get into like spoilers, but he literally like re-summarized what I read in the previous chapter, and it feels very repetitive, which is so funny because earlier today I was talking with Swift and just saying like, oh, how did Stephen King get so big? And one of the people was like, oh, he's so smart and so everything, and he's not at all repetitive, which is just like, hi, excuse my appearance, I don't work today, so my plan was just to lay in bed, be lazy, and finish this damn book, and then update you all when I was done it. But this line was just something, and I felt like it needed to be shared. I've been taking occasional pictures of some of the like lines and sharing them to my Instagram and even one to Twitter, but this one I just felt like needed to be in the video. Sorry for the autofocus there. So here we are. A man's hand is like an animal that's only half tame. Mostly it's good, but sometimes it escapes and bites the first thing it sees. That's it. That's the line. I'll see you soon. I'm sorry for my disheveled appearance. I just finished the book and I have a massive headache and don't feel well, but I thought I would try and record my thoughts before I forgot them because I'm very apt to do that. So it is still Monday, it's nearing like 9 p.m. or something, just after 9 p.m. So it took me most of the afternoon to get through the rest of it. I will say that the final bit of the book was a much quicker read than the beginning of the book. I also decided, as from my previous thoughts, that I think I'm going to try and stay spoiler free, just in case there is anyone out there who doesn't want spoilers. So there are some things that I'm going to be kind of like vague about, but I thought I would tell you kind of my thoughts of the novel. I'm not very good with like official reviews because I'm not very good at planning and organizing and staying true to my thoughts. I'm not very good at like following a script. I'm very good at rambling. So I thought it would be better just to have like an informal chat. So I do apologize in advance if it feels a little scattered and everything versus like a scripted actual review, which is why I don't really do review videos because it's so hard to organize my thoughts and then have to do them like immediately after finishing the book because my memory is so bad. What I thought I would do is start off with talking about some of the things that I liked about the book, and then we'll go into the things that I didn't like so much about the book, and then I'll give you like my overall thoughts. So some things that I did like. I liked the overall concept of the book. The idea of this man telling his story about this time working on death row, and the story of this man, John Coffey, who kind of, to be vague, changed his life in a certain way. I thought that was very interesting. I loved Mr. Jingles, the little mouse who does tricks and eats food and loves peppermints. So cute. Really liked Mr. Jingles. I liked... God, what else did I like? I think that might be all I liked. I feel like I should have at least one more thing that I liked, and I feel like when I was thinking about my thoughts originally, I had one more thing. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's all I liked. Now for the things I didn't like. For starters, I did not like the main character. And it's funny because on the back of the book, like it talks about here guards as decent as Paul Edgecombe and as sadistic as Percy Wetmore. And like, I agree to a degree that he was a good, quote unquote, good guy. He does try to see the best in people. He does try and treat people well. But most of all, it was just his thoughts I didn't so much like. He makes fun of this one person for saying how enlightened they are when they clearly aren't. But like he himself kind of has that same view, like of how enlightened he is, but he still comes with his own prejudices. And you still find him using slurs and talking about how a man should be and how good women are. And like there's one point where a woman, I'm not going to go into the details, was swearing and he acted like appalled at that. You know, women shouldn't swear. And again, I know it's the 1930s and it's just one character's thoughts, but it was kind of like, to me. On that same note, another thing I didn't really like was how unfleshed out his characters were. Which is interesting because everyone talks about how much Stephen King is a very character-driven writer. Like how well he creates his characters. But I feel like maybe it's just because we work, like it is a first-person novel and him recounting a story at that. So it's not like he's telling it as it's happening. He's trying to go based off of his own memory. But I feel like a lot of the characters were very two-dimensional. He himself had a pretty like fleshed out personality, but we were seeing through his eyes. And it's interesting because reading the acknowledgements at the end, he talks about how, again, I don't want to go into spoilers, but there's one character in his present who gets meshed with Percy from his back, and there's a woman from his present who's getting meshed with his old wife back then, and that's because they have the same personality. Like, they, like, the two-dimensional personality traits that they've given them are the same, and that's it. Percy is just like this young jerk who wants to be more than he is, and that's it. Like, there's nothing more to him. And his wife is just this wife figure who occasionally has sex with him and wants to like be a part of things but isn't really, and brings people tea. Like that's it. That's all we see of his wife. He has kids apparently, which I found out halfway through the book, and I literally don't even know their names. That's it. Like he has grandkids and we never find out their names. They're the reason he's in a nursing home, but that's about all we know about them. The inmates had a bit more personality, I would say. Delacroix, I still don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He was this man who did a horrible thing. He raped and murdered a woman and then burned a bunch of people to cover up for that. And then it seemed like once that was out of his system, he was kind of like a summy, fun guy. He was there, he was sad, and he really liked Mr. Jingles. Like, a little bit more. That William guy, what was his name? The one who wanted to be Billy the Kid. I don't even know his name. He was just a troublemaker. That was it. That was his personality. He just was a shithead. And then you have John Coffey, who mostly just stayed silent, has a very bad memory, and then, you know, this other thing that I'm not going to talk about because it might be a spoiler for the book. But that was about it. And I wish that they had gone into more of his backstory. You're told right from like when you first meet him that he has scratches and cuts all over his body that have healed and like scarred, but you never find out why. You never find out why he has this whole thing that the whole plot revolves around. You never find out how he knows certain things. You never find out like where he was, why he was doing anything, why he doesn't really speak, why does he have a bad memory. You never find out anything about him at all. And then, don't even get me started on the other guards. They are literally interchangeable in my mind. There's one guy, Brutus, who they call Brutal because he's big. And then there's a guy, Dean, I feel like maybe. Maybe his name's Dean, or maybe I'm just, because I've been watching Gilmore Girls, that's the name that's in my head. And I feel like there's another one, but I don't remember any of their names. I don't remember anything about them. Two of them are bachelors. Well, I think Dean maybe has kids. That's it. There's nothing else to them. And again, it could be just a problem with it being first person and in a memory kind of sense. But I wish that we'd gotten to know them a bit more. Another thing that I had a problem with was the writing itself. And I think this is the big one for me, the writing. So many people praise Stephen King on his writing and say how genius he is, how everything he puts in the book is so purposeful and how it all ties together. And then yet somehow I read a book that was put out as, I forgot the word already, but anyway, like 6 individual short story kind of things. And nothing, absolutely nothing happened until I would say halfway through number 5. The first like 4.5 were so boring and so dragging, and they were literally just a story about this man's UTI. Like that's the story. A man and his UTI. and how painful it is for him to pee, which we heard and saw in many scenes of him describing in vivid details peeing. Even after his UTI, there were still so many scenes of urination, and then we just got to hear about how it didn't hurt to pee. At one point, all of his buddies from work come over to his house and even points out the woodpile where he had a really painful pee. At one point, everyone is driving in a truck and they pull off to the side of the road and they all pee together in the bushes and even invite the other person in the truck to come and help them water the bushes. The scene, in my mind, made no sense. I think that you could have trimmed off the entire first 4 chapters of the book and it would have been much better. I feel like so much of that was needless. Like, it just wasn't purposeful. Oh, I forgot something that I did actually like about this book. One thing I did enjoy is kind of how the whole book seems to kind of, I don't know if this is just me, but in my mind it seems to be kind of have like a small undertone, not a small, a large undertone of how people of color are treated, or were treated and still are treated. I don't want to get into so much of the details of why without getting into proper spoilers, and maybe I should have just done some spoiler sections of this, but I feel like there's a really big undertone of that, and I feel like that is incredibly eye-opening, and that was something that I really, really did enjoy out of the book, and I wish there had been more of it. Now back to his writing. But one thing that I just found like really, really funny about this book is because I feel like there was such an undertone of how people of color were and are treated in this book. Like I felt like it was, but maybe that was just me reading too much into it or something. I felt like there was such a big undertone of that, but then I felt like this story of John Coffey, this black man on death row, the whole reason this man is writing his memories is about his time with John Coffey, but then yet somehow John Coffey's story got completely overshadowed by the main character's urinary tract infection. I honestly wish that I had had a physical copy so that I could have kept track of how many times it was mentioned. I wish, or even I had like a digital copy that I could go in and control F how many times it talked about his urinating, or his burning groin, or his urinary tract infection in general. The whole book is supposed to be about John Coffey, but instead that to me felt like a subplot, which is such a shame because that was the interesting part. The last like chapter or section and a half was so riveting. It was so interesting. I even cried. It was actually kind of unfortunate because I have a library copy and 2 of the pages were kind of stuck together and I had to like so gently pry them apart just to get the finale, which I wanted so bad. But the whole beginning of the book was just a giant slog fest, and it was so poorly written. So much of it was so repetitive, but I kind of talked about that earlier, so I don't want to get into like be repetitive about the repetitiveness. But not even just like the repetitiveness because it's a series novel type thing. There was also so much repetitiveness of stupid things. Like how I told you earlier about the shaking of the head. How he wrote, he shook his head left, right, then back to center. That happened 3 times. 3 times. And then another time, he shook his head up, down, center, then restarted or something like that. I can't remember the exact line, but it explained it in that way too. And I just feel like that was unnecessary. Like, why did you have to tell me that? During the executions, the first time he does the execution, he explains how he covers himself to protect in case an inmate goes crazy. And this wasn't even during the regular execution, this was during the trial. But then every single time he does it again afterwards, he explains how he covers himself again to protect himself in case they want to lash out. The only time it wasn't mentioned was during the final execution. And again, I don't want to get into too many details, but during the final, that was the only time it wasn't mentioned. The amount of times they just talked about urinating. Like, I get it, you have a UTI. Or like, I get it, you had a UTI. Like, you have a man who this story is about. Go back to him. But I feel like John Coffey was a subplot to this otherwise incredibly boring novel. I'm sure I have like a lot more thoughts, and maybe I'll even mention them in a future video. I'm honestly thinking that these are going to end up having to be like a series of ones because I haven't started editing it yet, but I'm pretty sure it's going to end up being incredibly long. Like, I'm pretty sure this is an hour-long video of just my thoughts on The Green Mile and briefly sprinkled in thoughts of Eye of the Dragon. So I think this is going to end up having to be a full series. So if I do think of other things, I'll make sure to mention them. And who knows, maybe reading other King novels will make me rethink some of my thoughts here or bring in more further complaints. But yeah, those are just like some of my thoughts on how the novel is. Overall, the beginning of the book, I would say, is like a 2-star to me. Like the entire first 4.5 chapter section series were like 2 stars to me. Then with a few sprinkled in moments that I did enjoy and stuff, but overall like 2 stars. But then the final like chapter and a half were like 4 stars to me. Again, they're not the full 5 stars because I still felt like the ending had left so much to be desired. I wish that there had been more to it. I wish that they'd gotten deeper into some things. But overall, I would say like 4 stars. But if I was to judge the entire book as a whole, I would probably say like a 3-star, maybe a little lower. It doesn't feel as bad as other books that I've rated 2.5 stars, but it doesn't feel as good as some of the books that I've rated 3 stars. But I think like as like a nice even out kind of thing, it would probably be like a 3-star book to me, which is a bit of a disappointment because of how highly rated it is and how much people praise it and everything like that. I'm probably going to take the rest of the night off of reading. I might even end this part here. I might have to kind of look into my footage. Maybe if I end it, I'll put a proper outro or something, record something like that and explain it all, but we'll see. But yeah, I might start The Woman Who Loved Tom Gordon. That's the only other one that I own. The rest of them I would have to get like digital copies or listen to ebooks or stuff, and I'll have to look into that. But I do own The Woman Who Loved Tom Gordon, so I'll probably start that one right away. Overall, I'm a little disappointed by the ending. The ending was goodish, but I was disappointed by the book in general, and the ending was kind of the only sole kind of redeeming part to an otherwise what I would call pretty mediocre novel. But again, this is just my thoughts. I probably should have prefaced this whole book with that, this whole video. This is just my thoughts. None of these are a reflection of Stephen King. None of this means that if you enjoy Stephen King or you enjoy this book that there's anything wrong with you or your thoughts. Everybody's different. Everybody likes different things. I'm sure there's lots of things I like that you don't like. But yeah, until then, I'll see you next time. I'm really tired.